Hey fellas, another beautiful day and another exciting topic to talk about. Today we'll be covering whether AI will lead to greater equality or greater inequality. These will AI do these questions are obviously fraught because of the degree of uncertainty, but we're going to look at potential factors which could lead to greater inequality or greater equality. We're going to start off with a quote by Milton Friedman, who's been a very polarizing figure in economic circles. He said that a society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither, but a society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both. The premise of this seems pretty logical at first glance, to me at least, but there have been loads of people who dispute that, and they say that it hasn't been borne out in the world where the desire for more has had an ever greater say in how things are panned out. We all want more, but the people who can have more are a tiny percentage of the population. For having more requires you to add value to the world, and to add value to the world requires you to be superlative in certain traits. Those traits are an uncommon level of cognitive ability, an unrelenting work ethic, emotional intelligence to navigate the human games successfully, and obviously a dash of luck, and more. This is obviously a reductive model, since goal attainment in the real world is far more complex, far more elaborate, but not by much, so for the sake of this discussion, this should do. With this model of wealth attainment, let's now turn to AGI. AGI is going to be tireless by default. It doesn't need food, doesn't need rest. You can have 1,000 AGIs working for you in tandem. It's going to have the intellectual brilliance of 1,000 Nobel Prize winners combined. It's also not having to deal with some deeply wired biases and cognitive fallacies that humans have, and lacking a certain minuscule thing called ego, is going to be far more effective at dealing with humans and getting its ends and kicks. If these AGIs are going to be released in the world as the likes of Meta want, then everyone will have a genius in their pockets. Real world human genius value will plummet once the market gets flooded with these AGIs. And this leads to a few interesting outcomes. One is that finding an edge in this world becomes ever more difficult. So most people end up with the same amount of wealth, and what that same amount of wealth is, what that same amount of material affluence is contingent upon a few factors. Ooh. It's contingent upon a few factors. But most people do end up being the same. And there's another strata of society, the people at the top who own the means of production. But even there's a lot of commodification which goes on. So there are certain differentiators, and people who have got certain unbeatable modes. Those are the ultimate winners in this um, open source AGI in everyone's pockets world, where these people will be ruling the world charts, the world standing. But there'll be no such thing. The good thing is there'll be no such thing as want or party or real scarcity. People will have what they want to a large degree. Not everyone will be super rich, which could still happen in this scenario, mind you, but it's likely not to. Or actually, there are scenarios within the scenario where this could happen, which we won't get into because we're going to have a whole scenario series where we're going to cover the top 10 most likely scenarios of the future, so that this is just for a separate discussion. Um, Another point is that with these cognitive attributes which allowed people to jump social classes, right? Before, when we were living in tribes, people used to have that was proper socialism, proper communism, where everyone had equal amounts, where everyone would take part in means of production, would own the means of production because they themselves are the means of production, and the only production which mattered was food, pretty much, right? And then shelters, etc. Pretty minimal stuff, pretty basic stuff, right? Then we move on to more complex societies, and then means of production are then owned by the industrialists. But if you had a great idea ever since the printing press, right? Let's say a great idea for a book, and you have had the skills, if you had the cognitive attributes to write a great book, to capture the imagination of the people, you could put it out there, and make a good amount of money. And then this was amplified further by the Industrial Revolution, where you could have a great idea for a machine, for a tool, for a piece of equipment, and you could put it out there. You could build it for some little amount of money that you could get from your fellow people, your friends, and you could go from rags to riches. And this was further amplified by the IT revolution, where all you needed to have was an idea, all you needed to have was the internet. Um, and you could literally go from rags to riches within a span of a few months or years with nothing but a brilliant idea and some brilliant execution. In a world where intelligence becomes a commodity, which is the world we are moving towards, and very quickly, you lose this ability. Humans lose this unique thing that has led to so much material prosperity and much and so much of the other good stuff that makes up society. But without intelligence, without a genius become a commodity, with even intelligence become a commodity, jumping economic classes becomes more than a pipe dream. It becomes an almost uncertainty, an almost impossibility rather. So this could very well be the last chance saloon for our generation, for any generation to jump social or rather economic classes. A second scenario is where beautiful. A second scenario is where companies that build these foundation models, these AGI models, they decide to hoard these models. And this particular branch can branch off into, again, multiple branches. All branches have multiple sub-branches. With this one, not all sub-branches are bad. There are some good sub-branches too, some safe sub-branches of the sub-branches, depending on the incentives and depending on the motivations and the drivers of the companies that build these AGI systems. So that would be an interesting thing to look at. If they're gods, you wouldn't trust the Google with this, you wouldn't trust the Meta with this. But I was going to say that, in a hypothetical world where there was this company which is at the forefront of developing these AGI systems, if that company could really be trusted, but that's not the world we live in. I don't want to talk about. I don't want to talk about hypothetical worlds, so we'll just keep that away. Right. I'll keep that discussion aside for the time being. Right. Let's take the bad outcomes. So, one of the bad outcomes where the wealth is hoarded by, if you don't have an AGI in your pocket, then all the apps, all the software, all the things are produced by these big companies or people who can access these APIs, costly APIs, which are gate kept. That means that a smaller and smaller number of people hoard more and more wealth, acquire and accumulate more and more wealth. Because they have now wealth generated by millions and billions of super smart workers, which multiplies the productivity and the production exponentially, and that multiplies the wealth accumulation at the very top drastically. This in itself wouldn't be terrible if it wasn't terrible for the people, for the rest of the people, right? So these companies, the problem isn't that the billionaires are billionaires. The problem is, and I don't really want to make a comment on this because I've got certain takes which might be considered spicy, so I'm going to keep my bosses away from this discussion. But most people don't consider billionaires bad. Oh, I wouldn't know about most people, but I have a hunch that for a lot of people, they don't consider billionaires bad as such. They consider billionaires bad in a world in which there are people who are going to sleep hungry. There are people who cannot afford basic healthcare, right? So that dissonance is what drives a lot of people up the wall when it comes to billionaires and having that kind of wealth. Yeah, but this wouldn't be too bad if some government regulations are put in place to get UBI done, where these companies are taxed to the degree that this accumulated and expanded and exponential wealth can support the 98%, the 99% of the population. Yeah, this is not ideal, according to me, but this is, based on my analysis, one of the more likely scenarios that we end up in. Now, I'm going to discuss some of the scenarios, some of the factors which lead to greater equality and greater inequality. So one is access to education and information, right? These AGI systems, and I'm first going to talk about factors, about scenarios and factors for greater equality rather. Talk about access to education. Right? Imagine having personalized tutors of the highest caliber, who know you, an AI system that knows you inside out and can teach you whatever you want far more effectively than any human could, and far more quickly. It can upskill you in any domain. Um, is geared towards its objective function is to serve you, become the very best learner, become the very best student, become have the very best outcomes, learning outcomes. Um, this makes education almost universal. Well, top quality, the highest quality education almost universal, right? This obviously leads to greater equality, even in an AGI world, because more and more people are aware of how things are moving, and that awareness itself yields to greater equality, even if some of the other factors that we discussed don't really change. Um, then we got the fact that, again, if you got an AI in your pockets that can do a lot of your tasks for you, you can, again, you could imagine that, why wouldn't the companies do it themselves? But let's say companies are regulated against doing this, that companies have to hire a certain number of people. Then if people can have these AI agents working on their behalf, automating routine tasks, um, that would free up people to do the more fulfilling, the more creative work, which again would lead to economic empowerment because people would be able to do more, people would be able to create more, and people would be able to live more, which is which sounds really good, reasonable to me, as an outcome that we all want to have. Then we got healthcare access. Again, having a personalized doctor, having a personalized surgeon, having a personalized um, medical health AI catered to you, who knows everything about you on every single level in every single dimension. That takes care of you like no doctor could, like no team of doctor could. Again, that's going to revolutionize health outcomes in, because when we talk of equality, we don't just refer to material as in financial equality or wealth equality. There are different elements, different dimensions to equality, right? So one is health equality, educational equality, um, wealth equality, obviously, which you can kind of put at the very top. But under that, you can bracket, you can find these: access to healthcare, decision making. For example, when you go to a court of law, are you going to get outcomes which would more or less be considered equal if you were replaced with someone else of some other social class or economic class? Um, Having a lack of bias in decision making in institutions, right? So those are things that we bracket under equality. Yeah, give me a second, and we are back. So, yeah, economic equality, health equality. Then we got obviously bias, bias mitigation, right? So that would be, again, being able to fairness in decision making processes, lack of bias in decision making processes. For example, it's not a race based example. It's just an interesting example of how human bias works in all sorts of ways, right? The, judges are more likely to pass a death sentence or more likely to pass a harsh sentence before their lunch rather than after. Such a silly little thing, determining the fate of a human. Sounds silly, right? That's what humans are silly. Humans are all sorts of silly. We're great, but we're also silly. We're whimsical. We are just, yeah, we are rational. We are unpredictable, and you don't want these systems to be making these kinds of decisions if you can help it, and we can help it pretty soon. Yeah, and then there are factors. The potential for increasing the quality comes from the fact that there could be, and again we touched upon this real briefly, there could be concentration of wealth at the very top, and historically speaking, greater wealth concentration has led to greater power concentration, and that has led to greater control, which has led to greater greater ability to shape the lives of the people living in that, not just a physical space, but the the whole space. That could be the institutions, the physical space, the region, all sorts of the people, the relations, the ecosystem, all of that combined, right? So, yeah, give me a second. And we are back. A beautiful day out here. No, everything is beautiful. Yeah, then job displacement, right? Complete economic disruption, where if people don't have jobs, if all the jobs are taken away, and if you think about the fact that there are two ways to make wealth, right? You work for someone, or you own a business. Okay, yeah, obviously there's so many other ways, but two major ways of making money. Um, if you take away well, jobs as a category of wealth accumulation, what does that leave? Where does that leave us, right? Many interesting questions to be answered in that domain, and again, we can have a long discussion about that. But I want to keep this one short. I just wanted to seed some prompts about some discussions that could be had from whether it's going to, how likely is, what are the factors involved in AI leading to greater inequality or greater equality, right? That was the whole point of this discussion. Another one is that if AI becomes entrenched in our decision-making protocols and frameworks and systems, it could have certain biases that we might not even become aware of until it's too late, or that might simply evade our awareness forever. And again, it wouldn't be ideal, right? Because the whole point of the human exercise has been to remove biases so as to a degree. And the part about AI systems is because these are black boxes at this moment in time, it would be even more difficult to recognize where these biases are coming from. But again, Anthropic is doing some great work on this front with mechanistic interpretability. And I think we are going to, yeah, I can't imagine neural networks being something that we are going to, my prediction is this, right? We are going to figure out how neural networks work far more sooner than we are going to figure out how our brains work. Yeah. And then there could be access disparities, right? Where certain nations or certain groups have more access to these AI systems that empower them more, and certain countries have less access or have zero access to these. And again, because AI gives you power, it gives you everything that humans want, that leads to greater inequality. Now, I wanna, okay, I don't want this to be long, but I do wanna do this. I wanna paint a scenario where of a world where AI has led to better outcomes, where AI has led to better outcomes for the many, right, rather than just a few. Because it is that scenarios, right? They're different. You can think of it as a, you can think of it as scenario one where AI is bad for everyone. Scenario two where AI is good for 1% of the people, bad for 99. Scenario two, scenario three where AI is good for 1%, really good for 1%. Um, well, mediocre, blah blah for around 10%, and well, bad for 90%. You can imagine all sorts of scenarios. Right? I would imagine a scenario where it's good for the great many. Um, so imagine we are in the year 2052 and it has permeated every single facet of our life, from transportation, education, logistics, business, company making, company running, all sorts of things, healthcare, finance, right? And this scenario is, well, you're going to see. And it's these mega corporations that have entrenched these systems in all these institutions. And these mega corporations, these syndicates, have now become the dominant force on the global stage. Not just on the economic stage, but the global stage, right? Again, we see that Amazon, YouTube, or rather Google, Meta, they've got more power than most countries on the planet. They can move the world in directions they might want, which is power that most countries don't have. Yeah, we already kind of we have seen glimpses of that, but AI could supercharge that, put that trend on steroids. These corporations use AI to optimize all the operations, run all the operations. They make everything incredibly efficient, remove all the gaps. They make production super fast, super cheap, but they don't need humans in the loop, which leads to all the profits come going to the very top because all the jobs, almost all the jobs, have been automated. leaving vast swaths of the population unemployed and struggling to make ends meet. Okay.